I'm Margaret Miller. I'm the director of the Contemporary Art Museum and Graphic Studio. They function under the umbrella of Institute for Research in Art, and we're a unit, an academic unit, in the College of Visual and Performing Arts. And we're delighted to have so many of you here tonight for this occasion to celebrate the work of Vic Muniz. It was about 3, almost 4 years ago that Vic Muniz first visited the university at the suggestion of Jay Dellinger, an independent curator locally. And he had absolutely the right idea that the particular expertise of Graphic Studio would be embraced by Vic Muniz, and indeed one of the major works in the exhibitions, Individuals, was produced by Graphic Studio in photogravure. And I was greatly delighted to hear Vic say that that project, which he began very early in his career, is finally realized from his standpoint in an optimum way. We've gone on to work with Vic Muniz in a number of projects, including prints at Graphic Studio, but maybe this is an example of the synergy or the real excitement of being able to have the units of Graphic Studio, the programs of Graphic Studio and the museum work together. The museum exhibition was initiated in Miami at the Miami Art Museum. It's going to be traveling to the Seattle Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal, and can I say? No. And maybe one other major, very major venue. Always it takes a tremendously wonderful and talented staff to make something like this come together. And I just would like to recognize a few people. First, at Graphic Studio, we have an amazing staff of curators and printers. Our shop managers, Tom Pruitt, who's worked very closely with Vic on a number of the print editions. Tim Baker was just working, proofing some new prints today for him. Marcia Brown, our curator, who's just left us, was early involved with Vic Muniz. Chris Kretz, Kristen Dufresne, Brandon Dunlap, Sarah Howard has helped a great deal on this project. Craig Kaths, Nikki Krushka is off at the moment, but helped early with projects with Vic. Deli Sacciolato, of course, with his enormous talents in photogravure, was part of the attraction. Will Litch has helped with photography. Noel Smith is one of our curators. Kristen Soderquist organizes absolutely everything for us. Matt Squires is one of the assistants. Eric Vontilius works in sculpture fabrication. And Randall West, the most important person of all, because he runs all of our money and accounts. And I'd also like to mention that Bob Ballard, an independent cabinet maker extraordinaire, has helped us with the boxes for the Individuals project, and I think he's here tonight. And then the staff at the Contemporary Art Museum, oversight of this exhibition coming from the Miami Art Museum. There's 100 works in the show, and we're showing 70% of the exhibition that was shown in Miami. And I point this out because now you see why we need the expansion to our museum. But nevertheless, the show looks extraordinary thanks to Alexa Pavada, Don Fuller, Peter Foe, David Reuter, Vicki Billig, Leslie Brousseau, and most of all, Tony Palms, who designed the exhibition, working with Peter and with Vic. And the exhibition staffs, James Roger, Denton Crawford, Amber Cobb, and Jordan Starr, and Dave Waterman. I also want to recognize our special guests in the audience tonight, Meg Malloy, the director of one of Vic's galleries, Sycamore Jenkins Gallery in New York. And I don't think anything happens with Vic without Erica Bencasa, and she's here. And Vic came down with photographers Ben Ruggiero, did I say that right? And Barney Kulak, who've helped with photographing the invisible billboard. If you haven't seen that, it's part of our project. It's on Nebraska Avenue near Sly, and will be up for a few days.
If you haven't seen it, it's because it's invisible.
Right. And Cloud will likely manifest itself on Sunday, a best viewing point on Bayshore. So we're hoping. We've had a little bit of frustration over that with Ernesto. I'd also like to recognize Wayne Mansfield, the pilot for the Cloud project, and his company Avatar. So my next task is to introduce to you Peter Boswell, who will in turn introduce Vic Muniz. Peter Boswell has held the position of Assistant Director for Programs and Senior Curator at the Miami Art Museum since September 1999. He is responsible for oversight of all the activities of the curatorial and education departments at the museum, including exhibitions and public programs. Prior to coming to the Miami Art Museum, Peter served for 3 years at the High School Arts Director at the American Academy in Rome, and for 10 years on the curatorial staff of the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. At the American Academy, his responsibilities includes organization and management of all public activities of the School of Fine Arts, including exhibitions, concerts, readings, lectures, symposia, and publications, as well as working with the annual Rome Prize Fellows in the Fine Arts. At the Walker Art Center, he was responsible for curating temporary exhibitions in the permanent collection. So, Peter, thank you for bringing this wonderful show to us here in Tampa and coming up to introduce Vic Muniz.
Thanks. Well, there have been a lot of thank yous, but I have to second all of Margaret's thank yous and thank Margaret herself for bringing the show here. It really looks fabulous, and I'm delighted that so much of the show was able to be seen. But you still should expand. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce Vic. His history isn't an orthodox one for an artist. You can't just read off a litany of schools and awards he's garnered. When he was 14, he won a partial scholarship to attend an academic art studio in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where he learned to draw from the nude in the classic academic fashion. He never attended college, but instead joined the staff of an ad agency in Sao Paulo. In 1983, he came to the United States, moving to Chicago, where he had an aunt who was living there. And the next year, he moved to New York. In 1989, he had his first solo show at Stuck's Gallery in New York with a series called The Best of Life, which is part of this exhibition. And as I say, the rest is history. He's exhibited throughout the world in both group and solo shows. Just a brief mention of a few of those shows. 1998 exhibition called Seeing is Believing that was organized by the Institute for Contemporary Art in New York, and that traveled around the country. He was also in the 1998 Sao Paulo Biennale. In 2001, he was the Brazilian representative at the Venice Biennale, and in that same year had solo exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in Rio and the Museum of Modern Art in Sao Paulo. In 2003, he had a solo exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Rome, Italy, and at the Centro Gallego de Arte Contemporanea in Santiago de Compostela. For almost 2 decades, Vic has been making photographs that honor, question, and subvert the nature and traditions of visual representation. His images are at once familiar but alien. After an initial moment of recognition, it quickly becomes clear that these images are not what they first seemed. His art works on multiple levels. It can be enjoyed in the simplest level as witty double entendres and allusions. But it also poses complex questions about how visual information is developed, presented, and understood. He reminds us that all images are made, and that they are made with a purpose, and that rather than accept them at face value, we should be prepared to delve into the motives behind them. But he also just wants us to delight in how images are made, including how art is made, how a series of marks or shapes or objects can magically coalesce into a face or a landscape. By continually seeking out new techniques in media, he finds new ways of creating images and new subjects to explore. He changes materials, media, and methods the way Picasso changed styles, to make things new, to see with new eyes, and to have us see with new eyes. Vic is a photographer, there's no question about that. Everything he does is with the intention of making a photograph. But as I hope this exhibition shows, he's also a remarkable draftsman, painter, sculptor, conceptualist, illusionist, alchemist, critic, commentator, and historian. His fascination with reproduction notwithstanding, he is utterly original. Not a mere copyist, but a creator of the first order. And as the catalog, I hope you've had a chance to look at it, as the catalog attests, he's also a great writer and a beguiling storyteller. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Vic Muniz.
What an act to follow. If I had to thank everybody who contributed to my being at this podium today, we would only have 5 minutes of lecture left at the end. So I'll just say that I'll thank everybody that Margaret and Peter have in the beginning. And it's a long story with Florida. It just started when Jade and Margaret came to my studio about 4 years ago, as she mentioned. And I didn't know how much trouble that would, that would bring, because I've been here so many times, and every time I'm at the graphic studio, it's amazing for an artist to be around stuff, Usually you're inside your own world, or organizing shows and traveling and doing what I'm doing right now, and you feel a little detached. I always say that I started as a weekend artist because, by the way, everything that you said about the shows and everything, I worked as a bartender. I was a bouncer in a roller skating rink. And I painted closets, only closets. They only let me paint the closets for suburban New Jersey, the whole of suburban New Jersey. All the closets were painted by me. I didn't sign it, but believe me, you own a Vic Muniz if you live in New Jersey. I've done many things that it would be very hard to mention all of the odd jobs I held, before coming here. But I started as a weekend artist. I was doing all this, either bartending or working as a framer or doing all these things in order to support what I did. Only the weekends I could go to the studio. I had this studio in the Bronx. It took me an hour to get there, and it was in the basement. And then I could really do what I wanted to do. And today it's pretty much the same. You just deal with studio matters, prints, numbers, you sign stuff, you send stuff, you travel, you do, and then you only have the weekends to do your work. I went from becoming from one kind of weekend artist to another kind of weekend artist. But it's very interesting to be, I want to mention this about graphic studio, because when you come here, you sort of take a few days off, and you're around people who are actually doing things. They're playing with paint, they're inking plates, and you see paper, and you see the stuff that an artist have to be around. And it's every time I came here, I went back to New York with a lot of ideas. Ideas are very dangerous things for an artist, because once you have an idea, then you won't sleep until you make it. Once I was doing a lecture with the artist Shri Nishat, and she does film. And then she mentioned that her work was really hard because she was, she was only one person thinking, and she had all these people to do the work, and only one person think. And I said, I have 30 people telling me what to do here, and I'm the only one person who can do the actual thing. So every time I come here, I feel very troubled because, for many other visits, and I've never heard of any artist who has been to graphic studio, which I had a contact with, that didn't share the same impression. It's also amazing that so many people come to an artist lecture. I personally don't go to artist lectures. I hate them. Artists are very boring people. Second only to musicians. Sorry if there's any musicians. When they talk, it's really hard. It's very. I remember sleeping on every single artist lecture that I've been to. So if you feel a little drowsy, just go ahead. I won't mind. Just. It's interesting what brought you here is surprising to me, and also what brings me here talking to you. And this is I have the microphone. It's formidable. It's like almost the worst accident that could have ever happened because I never planned it like that. I didn't want to be an artist from the very beginning because I didn't know it was possible for somebody to be an artist. I didn't know people could make money. My idea of doing what I do, having ideas, and my idea of an artist was a guy without an ear, with a funny hat, that die and somebody, becomes rich after he dies. So as Peter said, I was born in Brazil from a very working class family. And I had a very keen interest from the very beginning in representation, in any kind of representation. Theater was probably one of the first things that really, I remember going to the theater with my grandmother and falling in love with that. How can somebody be one person and another at the same time? The mechanics of theater is something that stayed with me. It could never be replaced by movies, for instance, because in a movie, you have somebody doing, like, say, Arnold Schwarzenegger is there killing 10 people at the same time, but he's not there. He is in Beverly Hills sipping a tequila or whatever, and he's gone. In theater, you have something formidable that happens is you have somebody that's in a way he's a king there, and he's a person at the same time. And sometimes through the failure of this representation, you get to see the person and the character, the person and the character. I became an artist, and a little bit of my interest in art comes from that. In that moment when something becomes something else, I'm a wall artist. That's a great, way to define yourself when you're thinking of becoming an artist. If I'm a book artist, a page artist, or a wall artist. It's simply because if you have, in a book, you have the whole mechanics is the narrative of page after page, how it becomes as you turn these little thin things, and how that information gets to your mind. In a wall, everything is completely different. It depends on how you approach it. In a book, the image, the narrative, your narrative with the image in terms of approach depends on the size of your arms. If you have short arms, you see big pictures. If you have long arms, you see smaller pictures. But you can do this, okay, but it's not like walking towards a picture. To begin with, there's no such thing as a still picture. If an image was really still, we wouldn't be able to see it. The visual cortex only registers movement. So if a frog don't eat a dead fly, it's not because the frog doesn't really fancy dead flies. The frog don't see the dead fly because his eye is a little bit different than ours. We move our eyes. We have many types of movements in our eyes that animate the world, and we perceive it as a still picture. But for that, there's a lot of movement happening. And still pictures, as they are, make us move towards them. There's a difference between movies. Whenever somebody sees something moving, they stop. What I think it's good about a painting or a photograph is that you move towards it. And as you move towards it, you change it, you animate it, and that becomes a cinematic event. You walk towards a picture, and if at first, from very far, it's just a point or something that's very blurry, as you approach it, walking towards it, it sort of, at one point, at one moment, it coagulates into the likeness of something. Being it a church, an angel, a Greek god, or whatever. And then if you get very close again, it just blurs again, and the museum guard tells you to get the hell out of there. The way people see pictures is very funny. If you look at the way people look at things, they walk towards a painting, and at one point they stop and they sort of adjust a little bit. They go. And then they go like this. They bursting themselves, like they're babies. They just go. What they're actually doing, they find out exactly the moment where they can see the surface of the painting, let's say a painting, and they go back and they see the picture. They go matter, image, matter, image. And in that movement, back and forth, you actually reenact again and again the exact moment when something becomes something else. That is the sublime in art, when you see matter becomes an image, when you see something that is just material becomes an idea. And by doing so, it's like, it's the most beautiful thing. It's just that little moment when you grab something. It's just like simply, it's as beautiful as like when, and as enormous as when the ball has left the hand of the player and hasn't reached the rim yet, or like 1 second before your first kiss. I think that all the art that's been done is a little bit for that little moment where, material becomes something that the intellect can grab. And this is pretty much what I've always loved about theater as much as, and I loved about drawing. Drawing has been looked downwards. We have video games. Well, who looks at pencil drawings now? But the whole history of humanity, in all its belief, in all its glory. You talk about religion. You talk about politics. It all came from a little trace in a cave. When a man, primitive man, once entered into a cave, and he found in the cracks of this cave something that somehow resembled an animal that he remembered from a great day of hunting. He looked at that and he saw the animal and he remembered something that happened in the past. And all of a sudden that started to fade, and he went there and painted an eye in the head of the animal, and he made all this memory come back again. That is the first, first of all, that differentiated that mark and that image from any other made before, and that made that man the first artist. The recording of history and the creation of representation enabled man to record his past and to remember things that he had done before and to build on top of this. So a little trace, goes a long way. Now we look at virtual reality and computer games and all the tools that we have. But it's always good to look back and see the whole spectrum of representation. And somewhat we may understand a lot more things that go a lot beyond just art and art history. I think art is very important in that sense, and I think my work is very important. There's an ethical part of what I do, which I think it's sometimes the artist is always pioneering fields of understanding. In a term, like for now, you just feel that something is lacking. In the recent years, I would say people really just miss an important date of history. Is around mid-90s or the early 90s. The invention of Photoshop has changed once and for all the way we look at history. We believed in cave drawings, and then we start believing in drawings that were made in walls and papyrus, in paintings, in canvases. We were known to create photography, and that we thought that was the ultimate vessel for our lives. And all of a sudden, that's worthless. Where are we going to put our history right now? It's very important to think about that. Just as you have all your hard drives full of family photographs, and in hard drives that will become obsolete very soon, and you have to buy new ones. And this is as information becomes very ephemeral, it also dissipates very easily. The other problem which is an interesting thing, is like digital photography has changed the way people look at the world. And I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just that we're not prepared for it quite well. We have made images as eloquent as sentences. There's a phenomenon going on in advertising, for instance, it's branding. The whole idea of the text that usually in the 60s and 70s followed advertising, now it's completely obsolete. They don't have people writing anymore text for ads. Because the images, they can do so much with just changing the image the way they want it, that all they have to do is to put a swish, swash, something like this, and say, just do it, Marshall McLuhan once said that education was developed to shelter the the population against the technological development of media. What he meant is that education was, when you learn how to read, you're protected from people who know how to write. Unfortunately, a lot of what goes on in education, has happened to supply a large number of clerical positions in the beginning of the century. So writing became essential, and because of the invention of photography, drawing just went. The teaching of drawing just went out of the basic curriculum. It's not like in Victorian times where people had to learn how to draw. Learning how to draw, for instance, doesn't really teach you how to draw. It teaches you to see differently. And I think we're not very equipped to teach our children what's the media that's also where we're actually immersed on right now. And we're dealing with media that was invented thousands of years ago. And, I see the way the technology has gone so fast, and we've become so fast into absorbing images, but we don't have, much discernment in the way we look. They share a very interesting grammar, and they very, very fascinating things. I'm very lucky to be a photographer in a time that photography became completely obsolete. The same way, the Impressionists, when photography it was announced in 1839, it didn't kill painting, it just changed it. The invention of photography liberated painting from its connection to the factual world. The painter, after photography, didn't have to paint what he see anymore. He could paint what he felt. He could paint what happened before, anything he wanted. Similarly, the invention of digital media has come as a sort of a ghost to haunt photography, in the same way photography came to haunt painting in the 1830s. And the result of this, that photography has become liberated. Leonardo da Vinci called art cosa mentale, a mental thing. And finally, the photographer can afford to do whatever he wants independently if there's a connection or not to the world. But ultimately, when a new medium comes along, it doesn't really kill another medium. It makes the other medium take a really hard look on itself. What photography did to paintings, they just made painters think, what is painting? And let's work on it. And what the digital media, or the new technology has done to photography as we know it, it has made us look really hard at it. So my work is a little bit of that as well. It's just concerned with sort of an education. I work with the same tools as most of the images that come through the media that you see every day. I don't want to change that. I don't want to make shocking images. I want to make images that are very accessible. They're usually an icon or an archetype, something that you embrace. But once you look at this and you grab it, there's something that happens there. So they're like the same material as any other images, except that they work as vaccines, It's like poison, like anything else, but they have antibodies. Once you look at my images and you become betrayed by them, you start to become suspicious of all the images of that kind. Becoming suspicious of an image is the best way that you have to develop your own education about them, and to create defenses against something that you have to be a little bit more concerned about. I think it's a great deal for the 21st century will be to close a little bit the gap between education and media production. And my work is just a little small effort to do this. But enough of that. There's so much work there, I feel like I can talk a little bit more about it than you can see the show, the actual works in the exhibition. I was talking about theater earlier, and I have that interest. I had that interest early on in theater, and my first appearance on the stage was I was imitating this Italian rat called Topo Gigio. I don't know if any of you remember that. And I went into the television program, tried to imitate. My mother had made this. The kids had a perfect mask of Topo Gigio. My mother had this very cardboard ears. And I looked really, really stupid in them. So I didn't get the first prize. And I couldn't beat Topo Gigio. But forever, I started thinking about why I can't beat Topo Gigio. There was something great about it. I was talking about theater, and I have to confess to you, I don't like good theater. I like bad theater. And bad theater, That's just a personal thing. You don't have to. Good theater has its own vibe, but just for me, for my own work, I can do better with bad theater. Good theater, as I say, is very similar to films. Once I paid a lot of money. They were charging people to watch Shakespeare in the Park. They never did that, but for that, because there was Anthony Hopkins doing King Lear. And I paid $50 or $60 to see the great actor impersonate the dying king. And I felt robbed. $60 to see Anthony Hopkins. And you know what? When he started becoming King Lear, he disappeared. I paid to see Anthony Hopkins. I knew that king. I had read about him. I didn't care about the king. I wanted the celebrity to be there, the bling bling. He disappeared. All I was left was that crazy king. But on the other hand, one day I just paid $3 and 2 bus trips to this abandoned firehouse in Queens where they had an amateurish production of Othello. And I thought it was the greatest deal I ever did because, the guy who played Othello, his name was Joey Grimaldi. One day he will sue me for that because I always mention his name. He was a plumber, and he just practiced theater in the weekends. And in the very beginning, it was a very poor production, by the way, and I sat right in front. In the very beginning of the production, he comes out as the general Othello. He had all the bravado and everything, and that lasted about 2.5 minutes, So he came as the general, and then he started becoming the plumber. And then the general and the plumber, and the general and the plumber, the general and the plumber. It's just like looking at the painting oil, like. For $3, I watched 2 tragedies. And it was all worth it. Bad representation makes the thing is, Anthony Hopkins, without his technique, he showed me theater. He showed me the character. He showed me Shakespeare. Joey Grimaldi, with his lack of talent, showed me theater and representation itself. And it's something that sometimes we lack to see because we're so, we love the society of spectacle. There's always this guy who does something very well. And because we're so tuned in to people who do things very well, we forget that in these little failures, sometimes we learn a lot more than when you see something really good. I am a perfect example of this. I was born to become a total failure. I didn't find out what I wanted to do until very late in life. And because I wanted to be a lot of things. And it's not that I thought I failed in everything, it's just that I wanted to be everything at once. Art, for me, has a little bit of that universality. You have to be or to want to do everything at once. When you look at a Rembrandt painting, I can see the whole universe in it. I get goosebumps. And it's just a portrait. I aim to do art it's very ambitious in that sense, but sometimes it's very hard to do with one piece. If you try to define the universe. Another day I was doing one of those lectures, and this one person raised their hand and said, what is art for you? And I said, well, sorry, but it'll take a lifetime for me to explain that. And he said, so then what's life for you? So, it's very, I aspire to be that generous. It's very hard to explain what it is, but sometimes you work in series. And one great deal for an artist, the greatest, really the hardest thing is to manage creativity, which is something it's like the weather here in Florida. It comes, it goes, it comes a lot, and you don't have time to do anything, then it's, wow, what am I going to do now? And I started working, this can be a 3-hour lecture, I'm sorry, but I'm going to, just tell me when to shut up, okay? I'll go to this very quickly, just to see. I started working with advertising, and one of the reasons I was interested is I was interested in psychology, I was interested in drawing, and I was interested in theater, and I thought I could never get into medical school. I failed. I didn't pass the exam, so I thought that maybe I could, and I attended just a semester of a communication school in São Paulo. But I thought that I could mingle this thing. Actually, what I wanted to do is to put naked people inside ice cubes in whiskey commercials. But they never let me do that. And And I realized that later that it's not because, I realized that I wanted to sell ice. I didn't want to sell whiskey, But my first job in advertising was I had a reading disability since I was very young. My grandmother taught me how to read when I was 4. And she taught me how to read the way she learned how to read, which nobody knows how she did. So she taught me how to read word by word by the form of the word. And it's amazing that you can learn that. So I was, I could read, my first day of school, I had read Treasure Island. But it took me 3 years to learn how to write, because I could only read type, and I could not write. I could not read handwrite. I could only read type. I don't know. It's just some crazy thing. And for years, I thought that I still had some after effect of that. And in São Paulo, in the 70s, I could never read the text of any billboards. I was just like, I didn't care anymore. And then one day I was driving with my mother, and I said, "Mom, can you read that?" She said, "No." And I was driving with my girlfriend. I said, "Can you read that?" "Of course not. Nobody can read any of these things." And I realized the billboards were horribly wrong. They would advertise a toy on the driver's side, parallel to a high-speed road. So you basically would have to be speed reading, driving, somebody capable, baby, a speed reading, driving baby that could read backward sentences at an enormous speed to buy a doll or whatever was there. I started thinking that I needed money desperately and I needed a job, so I started this independent research where I was at the same time I was working with this guy who sold speed reading courses, by cassette. So I talked to him. He was translating the same. So he helped me develop the idea of how much text could you read in blocks. And I developed a little chart of how much text you could read, different speeds at different angles of approach. And I went to the guy who owned most of the billboard places in São Paulo. They had 2 companies, and I said, your billboards are really horrible, and I think I can help you. And he was trying to develop a program, so he hired me on the spot. And the day I went to receive, it went very well. I fixed some billboards. I got 2 accounts going on, and actually I helped them to the point that in São Paulo at that time I received a trophy for in this Association of Advertisements of São Paulo they had a trophy for talent in media placement, whatever. It was an ugly plexiglass cube, horrible, and I rented a tuxedo to go to receive this trophy. And I didn't know anybody, so I was leaving this thing. And in front, I took my car, went around. In the front of this event, there was a fight. A guy had brass knuckles, was hitting another man in the face. And the girlfriend of the guy who was being hit asked me to stop my car and help to separate the fight, so I did it. And at the moment I was going back to my car, the guy who was hit picked up a gun in his car, and he shot me, thinking that I was his aggressor. I didn't know, but I still managed to drive to the hospital and be attended. It hit my leg. Luckily it wasn't fatal, and even more luckily. He was a rich guy who gave me some money that I bought a plane ticket 1 year later to come to the United States. So if it wasn't for that bullet, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. That's how lucky I am. When I arrived here, I didn't know what to do, so I started doing all sorts of, as I say, I had all the odd jobs that you can think of, and I think these are very important, if you're an artist, because you can use all of that. And I started dating one artist. So she had already a gallery. I'm not going to name. I know you all want to know who it is, but she didn't. She had already a gallery. She had a show, and everything was going really well for her. But she couldn't draw. she didn't know who Boucher was. And then she really sucked, And I thought, I can't do this. I think I can do this, I like it, I think this is the stuff that I can make stuff that people see. It will be like a theater, it will be this. And I rented a studio and started making sculptures, which was the first work that I did. And they are called, these little funny things that you see on the screen. It's a friend of mine that makes it, and I'm very ashamed of them. He's an Italian guy named Marco Caruso. If he offers you services, then say no. It was a series of objects called relics. And they were, in advertising, things have, you deal with substances that have no identity, a gooey black thing that they call Coca-Cola. They have, powders, blue powders, they're supposed to wash clothes, but then you give it a shape, you make it a package for it, you give it a name, you give it an identity, you put cowboys running behind it, and then that's it, you got a product. I was thinking about what if the person who makes the identity would have to make the product itself. So these are objects that have, the object would have serious identity crisis. So this is one of them is called the clown skull. It's a remnant of a race of clowns that existed in South America millions of years ago. This is the Ashanti joystick. Unfortunately, it was designed for the Atari base. It's not, but a PlayStation 2 is on the works right now. It's the rocking podium, for steroid using athletes. This is the pre-Columbian coffee maker. What people don't know is that most of the coffee they serve in delis in New York City is not Colombian, it's pre-Columbian. This is the bonsai table. The entire Encyclopedia Britannica in a single volume for travel purposes. And the half tombstone for people who are not dead yet. I bumped into this ad, in the late 80s, and it's a brilliant thing. So they just little sentence, little captions evoking in the mind of the viewer some of the most famous Pulitzer Prize winner pictures that were ever done. Is it focused right? Well, it says a 3-year-old boy saluting at his father's funeral, a woman crying over the body of a student shot by the National Guard, an American president lifting his bagel by its ears, a lone student standing in front of 4 tanks. And then it says underneath, if you can picture in your head, it was probably taken with a Nikon. Nikon this was a brilliant piece of advertising because they managed to publish in your head 4 of the most famous pictures ever made, and they didn't have to pay a penny to the people who actually did it, But what is the picture in your head? That's the question. You have a picture in your head. The artist only makes half of the work. The other half is the viewer. So the artist has to respect the viewer to be able to have a dialogue with it the moment he encounters the picture. I respect the viewer, but I don't know the viewer. So I assume that the viewer knows a few things, and the most basic things. First, the artist wants to cause a physical reaction, something that will grab the attention of the viewer, and then the dialogue begins. I think great art has to have a great respect for the people who is in front of them. And one of the reasons in that respect comes from matching what the artist is trying to say with what the viewer brings into the picture. Everybody knows these pictures, And then I thought, but how do you store this thing in your head? I had this first book I bought when I came to America was The Best of Life. It's a collection of these famous pictures that most of you may have in your house. The thing is, a very interesting thing is that you have this, all these pictures, and you still keep the book. And it's just the same way you open a little family album. You would open this book from time to time just to recharge your memory of these events. I lost this book one day. I took it to the beach. Why would you take a book to the beach? But I lost it. And then I went back. I couldn't find it. When I came back home, I started thinking about the pictures I had in my mind. And for two and a half years, I think, I started drawing them from memory. Sometimes I would call people and say, can you help me with that? Some of the pictures, it was very easy. I drew astronauts like this because I'm from that generation, so I could know more or less what it looked like. And once I photographed it, pictures like this for some, I also drew that because I wanted to do something with those pictures. I didn't want to know what. For somebody who draws, for instance, what attracts me to this picture is actually the weight of the sleeve of that guy. That's the thing I could only do right. The rest was like sort of fidgeting. Once I photographed, I make drawings. And also the drawings were horrible because I drew with whatever I had in my hand. So I would have a piece of pencil, I would have wash, I would have ink. And so my dealer at the time offered me for me to show the drawings. And at the same time, I was ashamed of the way the drawings looked. I didn't want to part with them. It was like my crossword puzzle, every Sunday I would work a little bit on them and try to remember more and layer the information that I was remembering. By the time they looked decent enough, but I thought, well, I can do the show. I have a good idea. I'll photograph the drawing, keep the drawing, sell the pictures. Good deal. So that's how I started photographing drawings. When I took a picture of the drawing, I couldn't help but to try to make it out of focus, to erase a little bit the type of information there was. And when I printed it, I felt compelled to print it with the same half-tone language that I had seen these drawings for the first time. So it was like an idea of going full circle. I had seen this, I drew them from memory, and I made them look just like the way they were. When people came to see this in the gallery, they thought, because I had gone halfway, so they thought they were looking at the really bad prints of the real pictures. They never questioned the picture itself, but they always questioned the quality of the print. When you look at something like this, when it happened. It's just like you can see it right now. When you go halfway with an image, it's also the power of suggestion. You're looking at this, and it's just happening in front of you. You're in front of the television, seeing that guy with that bag moving in front of the tank. Also, one thing that's very hard to remember is vantage point. This is what exactly happened. So the pictures actually are very different from the events that they portray. But they are an effort to sort of barter a little bit with the information that comes from the viewer. Another thing that we do often, we look at clouds and we see things in clouds. This is one other example of the image in the head. You're forced to see. Whenever I'm looking with somebody looking at clouds, I always say to the people, they all look like seals. And then you ruin it for everyone because, then you can only see seals in them. Just, oh, come on, man, another seal. So what I did this. One thing, also the capacity of the brain to register several images at once is very limited. We can only see one thing at a time. You have this optical illusions like the Necker cube or like there's many of them. I'll get to this in a second. So you can only see one thing at a time. So if you look at the cotton, you miss the cat or the praying hands. What I wanted to do is to do 3 representations at once, but you have to shift your mindset. So it's a way to empower the viewer to see something in something else. This is a long story, but I'm going to tell you, and we cut short. I'll just go to the end, okay? I was invited by the city curator at the city of Munster to do a project in the city. My idea was to have paint cows, and have them walk in the city. I would paint countries of the newly found European community. So I was thinking, somebody's in a cafe, he sees a cow go by with, say, in Norway, it's just a cow. And then you see Italy, wait a minute, that cow has the map of Italy in it. So I was spending time in France, and I asked this guy, they had a farm near, what I was saying if I could paint on his cows. He said, no, of course. And I said, well, if I paint it and I take a picture of it with the map of France. And he goes like, okay. And I said, and I'll give you the picture. I said, okay, you paint on that cow, and you wash it, and you paint it on it again. Okay? And I said, fine. See, I grew up in a city of 30 million people. I didn't grow up around large mammals, and I'm terrified by them. Very silly, I went to the town, bought a can of supposedly washable paint, got a road map in a windy day, and tied the cow to stump on the floor, and proceeded to paint on the cow with a road map in the wind. And the cow enjoyed it immensely. It kept coming towards me, and all of a sudden, what was supposed to be France started decaying. Paint started running, and I tried to do Spain. And then I tried to do Hungary, Paraguay, anything, nothing worked. The only thing that I could paint on the cow was another cow. By the time I was finished, I tried to wash it, and of course it didn't come out. So that was the shortest series that I've ever done. Lorenzo Ghiberti, this is a series that is very easy to dismiss in the exhibition. Lorenzo Ghiberti did something remarkable. He took 16 years in a commission from the Pope to do this work in Florence called The Doors of Paradise. And in this work, he dealt with very old form of making pictures of representation, which was the relief. And he combined that, which was the high technology way of making pictures at the time, which was three-point perspective. It's totally overkill. Once you look at what's in the background, the perspective in combination with the relief, and he twitched a little bit in a way that you really get trapped into the middle of this. You don't know what you're seeing, and you sort of have to give up one thing for another, and it's a bit of a visual trap. They're fascinating things, and I went to Florence and became obsessed with these things. I wanted to do something like this, but I wasn't friends with the Pope, and I didn't have 16 years of New York rent money to do this, so I decided just to do some things with wire. I was talking about drawings. Drawings are the easiest things to dismiss. And to fool somebody, if somebody looks at something, thinks it's a drawing, then all of a sudden he looks close and he sees it's something that it's not a drawing, it's a photograph of an object that existed in the world. Immediately he say, oh, what a fool I was. Where is this? When was this done? And he gets into the process of it. This sort of engagement with the process is a very interesting thing because they will develop another kind of narrative with the viewer. He starts getting into the picture. And you deal with things very simple. You manage to trap the viewer there. This is called Monkey with Leica. They're in the exhibition, you see. Relaxation. I tried to put naked people in those ice cubes. I couldn't do. Fiat looks. The idea of the line being the first way in which people actually develop way to making pictures was fascinating. I wanted to make other things with lines, so I decided to make landscapes. But landscapes are hard to do with wire, and they don't look very good. So the same way you fail doing something, it gives you an idea to do something else. So I started using sewing thread. And these pictures look like etchings, or shaded drawings. And when you look at them, and you see two kinds of representation, they are very incongruous too. You cannot place them together. So this is, and they're titled after the number of thread that I used. This is like 14,000 yards after Corot, or in the case of, like this is after Gerhard Richter, which is somebody who used paint after photographs. The more layered, the more interesting the pictures become. This was a big break for me. It was called The Sugar Children. I was doing a lot of work for a number of years, just that nobody would look at it. And I spent some time in the Caribbean. I met these children where they were sons and daughters of people who work in the plantations. And they didn't know how to swim, so I was always, every time I went to the water, they came and swam with me. And I got to know them a little bit about them, and to the point that they invited me to go to their parents' house to meet their parents. Their parents were very tired, weary people. They spent hours and hours working on plantations in sugar in St. Kitts, and I came back home with this very strange feeling of how those children, they were very beautiful and sweet, became those grown-ups. And as I was drinking coffee one morning, I just started putting sugar in the coffee. I realized that that's what we were taking from them. That makes the coffee taste good. It was taken directly from these kids' lives. I put a piece of black paper and I started trying to draw these small drawings that I did, and it worked out really well. And I did 7. One I ruined because I bumped into it right before. I had a little show in a backroom gallery in Soho, And a person from the New York Times came to review the show that was in front, saw this, and wrote a big review about the show that was in the back. Like a few weeks later, they were shown, a curator from the Museum of Modern Art came. Hey, how do you stop that? Yeah, good. Okay, that's good. Curator from the Museum of Modern Art came and asked me if I wanted to be in the new photography show, which is for a photographer is a major, major deal. I owe a lot of my success in my career to these children. And the good thing, also funny thing, there was these works are in all very important major museums, the Metropolitan, MoMA, all these big museums, they have these works, and they just went to all these public collections, which is, for me, it was very flattering as well. But there was this, everybody once talked to me, which is the piece that you like the most? I said, oh, I like the Sugar Children because they mean a lot to me. Don't you have any more to sell? I said, no. But in fact, there is a 7th Sugar Child. My UPS driver, at the time, his name was William. He came often to my studio. One day, he came in and he looked at one of these pictures on the wall and he said, what? Is this some kind of art or something? And I explained to him that it was art, it was photography. And he said, wow, I like art then. He was I really like this, man. And then he came, every time then he came to deliver a package, he came, what you working there? So he came up to my studio. One day, I was doing this work with thread, and he looked at me and said, I don't like this. It's too big. You made it too big, man. It doesn't have a relationship to the real thing. And I went to a dinner. I said, oh, William, too late. No, it's in the show uptown, and actually the show opens tomorrow, so I have no choice. So I went to dinner, to this show, with this very famous New York art critic. He sat in front of me, and then he said to me, I didn't like your piece. And I said, you're right, because my UPS guy said exactly the same thing. And he never talked to me again. But William had a baby daughter, and he came and he asked me if he could borrow. He didn't have a camera. He had never been to a museum in his life. He asked me if he could borrow my Polaroid camera, so he could take a picture of his daughter. And I said, no, I go there and take a picture of her myself. And I made the Sugar Child after the picture that I took of his daughter. And the first museum show I ever had, which was at ICP, it was very amazing because I had all the greatest curators of photography in New York came to the opening, and I was like, wow, I'm a photographer. And then, and at the same time, William came with his family, and he brought the Polaroid of the picture hanging in his living room. And for me, that was a very special night because I was hanging in two very distinctly different places and equally important. I think when you make art, you really have to consider all these things. These works, they hang often at the Museum of Modern Art and at the Library of St. Kitts, where I met these children. When I was working with Sugar, I kept going on, and I could think maybe I could add something else, another layer of meaning to these pictures. And I thought chocolate would be interesting, because chocolate can mean many things at once. And it can also have, if you paint somebody kissing with chocolate, it's interesting. If you paint somebody dying with chocolate, chocolate changes the meaning of what you paint with because it's a very complex substance. So I thought maybe Freud would be the best subject to start with. He probably would understand why people have this thing for chocolate. I did Jackson Pollock, The curator of the Pollock show at the Museum of Modern Art, he looked at this picture and said, this is here, definitely not Pollock. I like crowds, to paint crowds. When you meet somebody in New York, when you meet somebody in a bar, they say, you're an artist? You say, yeah. Figurative or abstract? And it's just like, are you pregnant or not? There's no midway. When you look at a crowd, I hate sports events because I've never been a jock and being hurt by a lot of jocks. And so I go to a lot of them just to see the crowd. And it's fascinating because you see the thing that is more representative in the first representation you see in your life is a human face, and you see human faces, which is the basis of our representation. And they start going. All of a sudden, there's one point where it becomes just a texture. And I tried to find out what's the wrong, but the people kept moving. But it's that's why I like doing classes. It's just the shift between abstraction and representation that adds a little bit to it. This is the hardest work I've done. It took a curator of the Whitney Museum offered me a show, and she said, you can do the show, but it has to be very, very specific for the museum. And she kept saying that, And that sort of stuck to my mind. I said, we have to do the museum. And I had been in a museum show in the Centre Georges Pompidou in France in the early 90s, and they had a show called Manifesto. And of course, in France, they always have strikes. And they had a strike of maintenance. So the whole show of minimalism and modern sculpture and architecture, they didn't get cleaned for weeks. So people were hating to see that thing. The people were complaining. I paid to see it, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. To see like the Le Corbusier chairs with this thick layer of dust, and it looked like they were made out of marble. It looked like classical again. To see Donald Judd with dust on top of it. Minimalist artists, they did things that were made to represent nothing but themselves. But of course, for something to represent itself, it has to be clean. And so you depend on a cleaning lady for such. I've always been a sucker for minimalism, because minimalist artists, they attempted the most poetic struggle to get something that's just matter and infuse it with the most ethereal kind of idea. It's very philosophical because it's very material, and that kind of impossibility there exists as itself, as an impossibility, but as a reminder of the tension between these two things. So my work is very inspired by minimalism. So I had this idea. I was in Honolulu doing a show, and I called Sylvia, and I said, Sylvia, I'm jet lagged. I'm in Honolulu. I have an idea. Can you do something for me? Can you just keep people from throwing the vacuum cleaner bags from the Whitney? And she said, are you crazy? I said, yeah, please do it. She said, fine. So when I came back, they had saved all the vacuum cleaner bags, like museum people do, room 345. Chamber room 495. They have the date on, So it was great, because they have very fuliginous first floor, black dust, and then on the top they have very white dust that they had just dismantled the Whitney Biennial. So I had a whole palette right there. And I asked if I could have pictures of installations of pieces owned by the museum, in the museum, taken by the museum photographers, so I could render them with the museum dust. Dust doesn't really go where you want it to go. You have to make stencils, and it has to go up and down, and you have to mix the color dust and just let it go up and down. So we work in 10 stations, mixing dust and letting go up and down for a year and a half to be able to finish this thing. But it's one of the shows that I like the most, So in dust, you learn things about dust. Dust is 3/4 of what dust is human skin. That's why you get dust in your house, even if you keep all the doors shut and the windows shut. And it stinks. In this dust, you have every single, cell skins from every museum visit. If you run a DNA scan on that, you come up with a wonderful mailing list. Also, you have fragments of every piece in the collection. So you get the most general substance, the most general thing that we know, which is dust, to represent the most specific meaning of which are minimalist works. And then it was something that Richard Serra really liked this. And in fact, they tried to, they put Richard Serra's piece for the occasion of my show, but they put it too low because they didn't have a really good reference of it, because I had stolen the picture from the museum to make the picture. So he called in because he had a Polaroid taken. He said, "Look at the damn thing on the 5th floor. That's the way it should be done." It was great because you get the real sculpture to be placed after representation of it. You know, this is in the show. This is pictures of ink. I'm gonna just sprint. How can it? Okay. Which is just, I was thinking about the way you look at newspapers, and it's just ink. It's just, when you start becoming aware of the material, you start understanding it a little bit better. This is things that I did with, first work I did with color. I bought this computer screen that they said there was 6 million colors. And as a good New Yorker, the first thing I thought is, who counted it? So I started working with colors based on numbers, and also tapping into the way that we start seeing representation nowadays, which is through the bitmap. We become very versed on seeing those little squares. And these were my work for the Venice Biennale, which I thought had everything to do because it was great. It's the styling thing and mosaic things that you see a lot in Venice. Sometimes I go back to things. You feel that you haven't done everything. I saw ideas also, they come from very ethereal, very ephemeral, little things that happen. You have to be always very open. I saw these 2 girls in Ipanema in Brazil playing cat's cradle. For hours they were doing this thing. And I kept thinking, I always wanted to do architectural pictures. And I looked at that and I thought, bingo, I can do that. And because of this, there was this sort of state of arrest and tension. I thought the prisons of Piranesi would be the best thing to do. So with thousands of pins and the black thread danced between them, I made versions of the Piranesi prisons. The pictures are so big and sharp, sometimes you see the reflex of the camera and the pinheads. These are details. I'm going to go do this very quickly. A lot of this is in the show. You can go see it for yourself. I keep thinking of how fragmented images in the media are. So you think you know Gwyneth Paltrow because you see little pictures of her. But actually, it's just little pictures. I thought maybe I could reenact the idea of fragmentation of a human being in the media by doing it with fragments, but very specific. So I got the hole puncher, started making faces of people. Because this is the Brazilian president, Lula Inácio da Silva. I took his portrait, I went to make his portrait. And then I told him that I was, if somebody wears a green shirt, you buy a lot of golf magazines. If somebody wears a blue shirt, you buy surf magazines. And for the skin tones, you buy porn magazines because there's a lot of skin in it. So I told him that I was going to do him with porn magazines. He wasn't really happy about it. This is Joãozinho Trinta, samba school director in Brazil, a wonderful guy. This is Seu Jorge, he's a personal friend, and he's a musician from Brazil. And this is Pelé. I photographed it. He was great. And then I thought maybe I could do some still lives, because actually I'm a table artist, and I've never actually did still lives, and the medium rendered perfectly to do this, and it was my last show in New York. I have roses in my backyard, and I hate when insects land on the roses, so I thought maybe I could make a rose and leave all the insects outside. So I made a rose out of 7,000 plastic bugs. It was in the beginning of, I started seeing a lot of pictures of children with guns. And I kept thinking about what that came from. And at the same time, I saw this picture from the Library of Congress. This is the daguerreotype of this young soldier in a civil war. And I decided to make it with, and these are very large pictures, make it with toy soldiers. And this is but what I was into is not the relationship. I thought I liked the texture of toys. Toys is a way that we learn to interact with the world, is through little effigies of it. And so you have this wealth of little things that represent other things in the picture. You never get tired of looking at this thing. This is a self-portrait whirring. Some of these pictures are in the exhibitions. Don Quixote. This is a collector of mine once asked me to go to his office, and he asked me, "Why don't you do pictures with diamonds?" I said, "Well, I don't have diamonds." He said, "I'll give it to you." So I thought what I could do, maybe I could do something very funny with diamonds and get some, but it was too easy an idea, you know. So he gave me, and I thought maybe if I do something that's very bad with diamonds, it's like, oh, that's very sophomoric. So I'm going to do completely overhead. I'm going to do divas, Hollywood divas with diamonds. See how crazy, you know, the idea of something that's eternal, and you do with something that's eternal. And it was very successful series because, you know, when you get these tiny diamonds that he gave me and you enlarge them, you end up with like 100-carat diamonds, and people want that. Even if it's a picture of it, they want it, you know? The same way I never had a show because I felt ashamed. This is so opulent, you know, so nouveau riche. So I had to do monsters out of caviar so I could show them and feel comfortable about it. Caviar is the opposite of garbage because it's something very transient. You know, there's something that's always changing. That's what a monster is always about. This is a project that I've been doing in Brazil. My canvas now is about the size of 2 basketball courts. I have to stay about 40, I would say 60 feet high to be able to take these pictures. And, you know, this is what you see there. For instance, it's a real piano there. You can see for yourself in the exhibition. And, you know, we started doing this, and I do this in my studio in Brazil. From the floor, I shoot from a 45-degree angle. So from the floor, what you see, you don't see anything. You just see this enormous trapezoidal form, which is what we call an anamorphosis. From up there, the camera corrects the angle of what you're seeing down there, and you actually get to see, you know, the famous Saturn eating his children by Goya. I did this picture first, and then I thought, why not make, you know, a suite of Greek gods, which I thought would be interesting. You know, a Greek god is something is a simplified thing, you know, and you get something that only means one thing, just one ethical lesson out of this very enormous complexity. I think you also become simplicity. It becomes aware of how simplistic are our ethical lessons. What you see on the left upper corner is a real Jeep. You know, it's a military vehicle. And this is, of course, Velázquez Mars with his funny mustache. This is Narcissus from Caravaggio. And then that's like a road cone there. Sisyphus, Icarus. Thanks, Eric. And this is a little short film of the making of the work. So it's a little, you know, stop motion thing. This is Sisyphus carrying a rock. Okay, we're going to go to the drink soon. Don't worry about it. And there you have it. Oh, earthworks. I've always, you know, this art for the 60s or 70s never ceased to fascinate me. I keep thinking about Smithson's Spiral Jetty. You know, how many people know this piece? Most everybody, I think, have heard of, seen it, you know, in a picture. How many people has been there? Most nobody has been there. You've been there. Yeah, very few people, you know. But I think it's a great thing that these works are done in such remote areas, like the Salt Lakes and pieces in the middle of the desert. Because I've always wanted to go to see Spiral Jetty, but at the same time, I never wanted to, because I'm afraid it's too small. I'm afraid it would cease to exist in the magnitude that it exists in my mind, and I keep thinking about it at night, you know, under snow. And it's just, he made a sculpture in my mind, which is fascinating. I always think of these air drawings, like the Nazca drawings, and things that are there for like some kind of space visitor to see. I wanted to work with it, and my first idea, my grandfather, he never believed the man landed in the moon. He thought that the whole thing was concocted in some sound studio in Queens, you know. But my grandfather also never, he had two televisions, one color TV to watch the soap operas, and a black and white to watch the news. Something about it, you know. It was some sort of media critic. I thought about, you know, making the remaking the earthworks and leaving bits of it, like of the making of it, in my studio, so people would think that they were never made. And they were actually, but that's not fun. It's like that cow, if I could Photoshop that cow and that cow, but I wouldn't have a good story to tell you. So what I did, I said, maybe I'll do my own earthworks. But I never understood why they only make lines and triangles and things like that. Why didn't they draw things with it, Simple things, archetypes. So I decided to, get on a plane and do this really huge earthworks and photograph them from a helicopter. But I did, at the same time, I did the very large ones, I made small ones. So this is a real one, this is like big scissor. I made small ones, and the thing is about the model and the real thing, which is you get something that's very easy to do and precedes the real thing, and you have the real thing, which is so absurdly hard, so hard to do, and you show them in the same light. So I had an exhibition in New York. I had an exhibition that was full of fake earthworks and real ones done at incredible expense. So if people didn't know what to make of it. These three here are real ones, which you see near, like that's a person right there. Now I've made 23 new ones last year, and they're about 4 or 5 times the size of the ones that you're seeing. I'm going to post the coordinates of them on my site, which is www.vicmuniz.net, and you can visit them on Google Earth. They're about half a mile long. This is one of them. This one you don't have on Google Earth. You have 4 of them that you can see on Google Earth. This is about 600 meters from the one end to another. This is the same. See, that's the Italian guy. He does this. I hate that. Those are buildings that you see down there. Caruso. That's a whole valley back there. And what you see in the upper left corner is actually a town. This is one of the ones that exist. This is almost a kilometer from one end to another. Now we put some more here. And this is what we wanted to be seen today at the sky. And the canvas wasn't really primed yet. So it's something that I thought, people love to see, some people like to see drawings, but some people like to see drawings, but everybody like to see somebody drawing. When you see, like in Washington Square, any of these public squares in towns where they have people drawing caricatures, there's one victim sitting in a chair, and there's the artist, and behind the artist there's like about 10 people trying to see if he's doing a good job, I thought drawing could be elevated to the idea of broadcasting. So I teamed myself with very talented artist, Wayne, who probably is around here, I don't know, and I drew some really silly, cartoonish, Disney-esque clouds and asked him to put it in the sky. This is over the 59th Street Bridge in Manhattan. And people, it's something that you expect to see in the sky, but not in the form of a drawing. This is over Manhattan in 2001. This would never happen again, by the way. There's a flights over Manhattan. The regulations now after September 11 don't allow anybody to do this. This is over Miami. It's another one over Miami. And this is something that it's sort of stopped right now, but I've been trying to work this with Intel. The same way you make the big drawings, you make the smallest one. This is probably the smallest drawings ever made. They use the cheap etcher at Intel, but they use the ones that they're making the state-of-the-art chips. And then I wanted to make something in a castle in a grain of sand. That Blake story. And I sent it to them, and they said, "That's grain of sand is huge." So they sent this thing that is like 1/1,000,000th of a length of a hair. I said, that's ridiculous. I want just in a glance. So they were like, okay. So I think they lost interest because it was too big. This is a grain of sand, and this is the castle right there. What I wanted to do, actually, I wanted to do photogravures with this. Like the interlaying, the interlacing of technology and scale is interesting to me. But most of all, I always put this picture. That's not mine, unfortunately. This is a picture by Lewis Carroll, and it's called St. George and the Dragon. I love children. I have 2 one is not a child anymore, he's a guy. But the other is a baby. And I think children is always a great source of inspiration, because we learn to play, and we have this picture of the world that is very, very accessible, very accommodating. Things can be other things. They can be other things. Their meaning sort of ricochets throughout the elemental, and it's very easy. The mind of a child is an amazing acid trip. That's why people take drugs. They want to be children again. They want to have that openness that the children have. They miss it. They live without conventions, and they see things without conventions, and they make the wildest connections that sometimes we fail to see. And in the precarity of their way, of their interaction with reality, they discover things that sometimes we fail to see. We don't discover any longer. So Picasso has always that, he says, after his great aim as an artist was to be able to see things again as a child. And I think that's just what sometimes we always have to continuously try to as artists, to foster, to bring back this child that exists inside ourselves. To create what Antonin Artaud once mentioned in a poem. He says, spaces for life. I think the use of humor and also visual illusion is a great way to engage these aspects of spatial aspects for yourself to be in the work. I think when you tell somebody a joke, what you do, you sort of create a structure, and you climb the structure with the listener. And at one point, you just break a very essential part of the structure, and the person who's listening to the joke falls. And it's a logical structure. And then, at the moment he falls, every other logical structure collapses, and the burst of laughter is a little moment of freedom. When you see an optical illusion, also you're dealing with something that is corrupting a way that you learn to see over the course of your entire life. That's why people fall many times from optical illusions, and they don't laugh too many times about the same joke. Just to be polite, sometimes they do. But I think humor and to engage the viewer in a physical way. Sometimes people say, "Oh, that's very gimmicky," but I don't know of any great artwork in the history of art that didn't grab you somehow physically. And I think this is one way also to make the work accessible more for a general, more open public. Yes, I have one more thing here. Yeah, that's a funny thing. Well, I think I talked too much already, and I thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thanks a lot. And thank you. And I should plug an advertisement here. I have an exhibition opening in New York City. Opens on the 9th of September at Sigma Jenkins and Company. If you happen to be by New York City in this period of time, I'm very excited about, because it's the whole ensemble of the pictures of junk, and a new series called Pictures of Pigments. I didn't show it to you here, but it'll be, I'm very excited about the show. If you can come, I really appreciate it. Thanks.